I completely blanked on the name of the school I'm going to right now.
Truman?
Truman Middle School, okay. It actually started at the ILC, which is Rockwood's alternative school.
Okay.
And it was like 10 kids. I swear, I sweated through my shirt. I was like, oh my God, what am I doing? Hadn't ever told my story really, except to my wife, and I still get nervous. The first time I spoke, I didn't know what was gonna happen. The night before, I sat there and I wrote it all out on pen and paper. That morning, it all went out the window, man. I'm telling you, I got there and I was like, I can't do this. I can't sit here and read from a piece of paper. I'm just gonna do it. It was raw. It was very, very raw. People could tell that, you know, my emotions were like completely into it. A lot of these kids have been going through a lot, and my heart really goes out to them. They go through a lot at home, and they go through a lot at school, especially high schoolers. I feel like when I started using drugs when I was 15, like my life froze at that moment. I have a quick story to tell you guys about my experience with drugs. It's something that I'm very passionate about. I went to the Rockwood School District, and my parents moved out to Rockwood when I was entering middle school, and they wanted to give us a better shot at having a good future. We had lived in University City, and my dad just, you know, thought it would be better for us if we were in Rockwood, and it's a great school system by all means, so that's what we did. I went to Crestview Middle School, and I was a great kid all around. I made great grades. I stuck close to home. I was a little mama's boy, and I enjoyed that. I really didn't mind not having a social life. You know, I was the new kid, so I didn't know too many kids out there. So that's kind of how middle school went for me. Things didn't really take a downward turn until high school. Halfway through my freshman year in high school, having a social life became more of a priority. I saw a lot of my friends, they were going out, they were hanging, they were going to parties, they were, you know, they had get-togethers every day after school, and I was making straight A's, and I was doing great in football and wrestling, but that part was missing from my life. So halfway through freshman year, I kind of pushed my morals aside and became open to doing more things, new things. And that's when I was most vulnerable. And a kid that I played football with approached me one day and asked me if I was interested in going to this party with him after school. And I didn't think much of it. I knew that, you know, potentially maybe drinking and drugs involved, but I thought I was strong enough to not go that route. But nevertheless, I told him, you know, hey, definitely I'm going with you. You know, met him by his car after school, lied to my parents. The first time I ever lied to my parents about anything, told them that I was staying after school to watch a varsity football game, and I went to this party, and 5 minutes into the ride, kid I was riding with pulled out a bag of weed and started rolling it into this cigar. At that very moment, I was more worried about what my friend would think of me if I said no, and if he would want to hang out with me again if I turned down this this pot. I took a puff off of it, and I didn't really feel anything, and then I kept going, and before I knew it, I was high, and You know, I was just sitting there and I got really high and I just sat there and I started sweating and I kind of almost had like an anxiety attack, but I just went with it. We got to the party and once again, within 5 seconds of being there, I got handed a beer. I opened it up without thinking. Again, I had never seen my parents so much as drink a beer in their lives. I had never seen them do anything. And so I knew it was wrong, but I did it. After that night, I decided that I was gonna start smoking as much as I can, and that I would hang out with the kids that smoked weed, and that way I would have my own little group and I wouldn't be secluded anymore, and I would have a social life. And so I started smoking pot every day as often as I could. I started skipping class. I started smoking before school, after school, during school, whenever I could. Very quickly my grades dropped. Once I made that a priority and my grades took a back seat, and my grade point average fell from a 4.0 to a 0.50 within a semester. I wasn't passing a single class. I just didn't care anymore. All my ambition was gone out the window. I mean, it was that drastic. I absolutely didn't care. I got kicked off the football team and I didn't care. I got kicked off the wrestling team. I didn't care. Parents couldn't figure out what was wrong with me because I was hiding what I was doing. I became very good at lying and very good at manipulating. Anyway, I carried on that way for another 6 months, a year, and pretty soon pot got old. I got you know, bored with it. It wasn't doing it for me anymore, and I knew there were some kids in the school who were doing other things, and once again I went against my better judgment and went and hung out with these kids at a party, and there was a bunch of kids there, and I went and sat down, and before I knew it, this plate with these brown lines came around to me, and I immediately knew that it was heroin. I knew it. I didn't do the right thing and get up and just leave. I sat there and I proceeded to put this disgusting dollar bill that 20 other people had up their nose. I put it in my nose and I did this line and I fell asleep, and I didn't like it much. It just made me sleep. But the point is that after I did it that one time, I wasn't scared of it anymore. It had taken the stigma of that drug away, and it made me open to doing it again, and that's what I did. I told myself that I was going to do it just one more time, but of course, when I did do it one more time, that's when I started liking it, and after that, everything went out the window. I started doing it every other day, and then every day, and then 3 times a day, and I cared less and less about school. I started stealing to fuel my habit. I was in high school, so I didn't really have a job at the time, so I started doing whatever I needed to do to get money for this drug, and it made me crazy. When I think back on that time in my life, I find it hard to relate to that person that did those things, because I did some pretty awful things, but at the time, I thought it was worth it. And so anyway, senior year came around, and while I saw all of my friends going off to college and leaving St. Louis and going to Columbia and wherever they were going, I was one of the few that didn't graduate, and I was one of the few that wasn't going to college, and it made me very bitter and angry and mad. And there was really nobody to be mad at but myself. Sure, I was popular. I'd become the popular kid in school. I had all the friends in the world, but that didn't matter anymore because they had all left me. They had gone off to college, and I was all of a sudden by myself, mad at the world for whatever reason, because I had put myself in this situation. Had to go to school for another semester just to graduate, and so I did. I graduated somehow. After high school, things only got worse for me. Instead of picking up and saying, hey, I've made some mistakes in my life, but I'm not going to go anymore. I'm not going to go forward with this anymore. I'm going to put a stop to it. I just kept going more extreme and more extreme, and I eventually started using a needle to shoot up with, and at that point, I was very, very much addicted to the drug. I had to have it every couple of hours or else I would start getting very sick. My parents by this time knew what was going on, but they had lost all control over the situation. They didn't know what I was doing until it was too late, and when it was too late, I was so deep into drugs that it was very hard for them to figure out what to do. Even though my dad was a drug counselor, he was lost, you know. I guess my parents were in denial for a long time. I was not supposed to be the kid that was gonna turn out like becoming a drug addict. I was the last of my brothers and sisters that my parents thought would become a drug addict, but it happened to me. So it caught my parents off guard and they were blindsided. Anyway, I graduated high school. I was at the bottom. I was basically sitting in my room doing nothing but sticking my arm with needles, getting high, and my arms were so badly bruised, and I wore long sleeves. I didn't want anybody to see how bad they were. I didn't leave the house. I just became very reclusive. I was stealing from my friends and just doing everything and anything I needed to do so I wouldn't get sick from this drug. Eventually, I had an opportunity to go off to college. I was approached by, my dad managed to put something together where he got me into this school down in Fulton, Missouri, and my parents were very excited. They thought that it would be a new opportunity for me. They thought that by getting me out of St. Louis, I would all of a sudden become cured and everything would be all, you know, would be well. But that wasn't the case. After years and years of, like Jared was talking about, destroying my brain with this stuff, I had become very sick in the head. My thinking was very sick and twisted. Like I said, I was lying and I was manipulating. I was just very twisted, and so my parents thought that by sending me off to school it would make things better, but it was the opposite. They put me in a very quick drug detox for like 3 days. And instead of going into the hospital and getting off of heroin, I decided to take heroin into the hospital with me and get high the whole time I was in the hospital. Supposedly getting off of heroin, I was doing more. And that's what I mean. That's how messed up my head was, my thinking was at the time. So when I came out of that place, I was in worse shape than I'd ever been. But still, I went home that night and I smiled at the dinner table and I told my parents that I was okay and that I was gonna make them happy, and they bought it. And they sent me off to school the next day with a couple $1,000s and the car, and school was about 3 hours south of here in Fulton, Missouri. And the second my mom left that campus, I got in the car and drove the 3 hours back down to St. Louis, got heroin, went back, and did that every single day for the next month. I did that until I had no money left. I was not eating. I had lost about 20 pounds, and my car was basically broken, and I had to call my dad up and basically beg him for more money because I was out of money and I was out of drugs and I needed more money. So I called him and I told him I needed money for school books, and he didn't buy into it. And so the next day he showed up to my dorm room, and I wasn't prepared for him to show up, so I didn't have on my long sleeves to cover up my arms. And I opened up the door and he saw me and he just passed out. He couldn't believe the way I looked, how much weight I had lost, how badly bruised my arms were. My eyes were sunken into my skull. I looked like I was dead. So a few minutes later, he told me that he was pulling me out of school. He had already talked to the college admissions department, he had already talked to the college admissions department, and they told him that I had not attended a single class. And so he pulled me out of school and he came to my room and he said, "That's it, you're done. You either come with me right now or you say goodbye to this family forever." There's a lot I'm leaving out just because, you know, time restrictions, but I had done a lot of awful things to my family during this time. You know, it's one thing to live as an addict, but to love someone who's going through an addiction, it really tears the whole family apart. What I put my sister and my brother and my mom and my dad through is really unimaginable. So for my dad to offer me another chance was just, I never thought it would happen. And he told me that he was getting rid of the house here. He said, "Get in the car with me right now. We're going to Virginia. We're going to start a new life. I've got a friend up there. He's gonna help you get better. He runs a clinic up there, and that's where we're going, or else don't ever contact anyone in this family again." So I got in the car. I didn't have any other options at the time. He sold my car for like 20 bucks just to upset me, and we got in the car and went to Virginia. And the whole way there I was sick. I didn't have I hadn't used in a couple days. And I actually at one point begged my dad to take me to go meet the drug dealer and get me drugs. And I don't know how I could have done that. It was just the sickness in me. I was so desperate at that time that I didn't think it was a big deal to ask my dad to take me to go get drugs. But anyway, we got to Virginia and he took me to this clinic, and I started taking this medication. It's called methadone. It's a very strong medication that heroin addicts use so they won't get sick, so they won't feel the sickness from not having heroin. And it helped me. It kept me in Virginia. I started working. A couple weeks went by. I went back to school. I started attending a community college out there. I thought I was doing well, but I hadn't fixed again the damage I had done to my brain. And before I knew it, I had hooked up with a couple of guys that I was working with, and they smoked pot, same way I started in the beginning. They smoked pot, and I told myself, you know what, it's not heroin, it's not a big deal if I just smoke pot. I'll reward myself with this. It'll be fine. As long as I don't use heroin and I'm not using needles anymore, I've really accomplished a lot. That's what I told myself. So I started smoking. And these guys were a really bad group of guys up there. I didn't know about it, but I didn't know too much about it when I met them, but later on I learned that they were just a really bad group of guys. They robbed people, they sold every drug imaginable. And a couple weeks later, I found out just how bad they were. They came to my house one day, and they asked me if I would accompany them to this house, a friend's house of theirs. They said a friend's house, to get a watch back that they were holding. I didn't really understand the situation, but I said, okay, what harm can be, come out of that? I'll go over there with you. I thought there might be a possibility that something bad would happen, or else they wouldn't need a bunch of people. But, I tried to push that out of my mind, and again, I just pushed myself forward and went against my better judgment, got in the car with these guys. We pull up to this house. Before I know it, they're pulling out ski masks and baseball bats, and I started panicking, and I knew something was wrong. I knew that they were gonna do something very bad, but I didn't listen to myself, and I went along with them. I went into this house, and the second we got in there, it all went, it went downhill very fast. A gun, one of the guys I was with pulled out a gun, and there was a little baby in the house, and there was a mom and the guy, and they put the gun up to this guy's head, and they took him upstairs, and they said, where's the watch, and where's this, and where's that? We want it all. And I was panicking. I stayed downstairs, and I tried to comfort the mom, who was hysterical at this point. A few minutes later, they come downstairs with trash bags and blood on their shoes, and I didn't really know what had happened. So I asked him, I said, is he okay? When we got outside, I said, what happened up there? Is he okay? What did you guys do to him? And they said, no, he's gonna live, he'll be fine. And I asked them what they had in the trash bags, and they pulled out all of this marijuana, and they had cash and just drugs all over the place. And it turns out that this guy was like one of the biggest drug dealers in the area, and they tricked me to go and rob him. And that was their whole thing was from the beginning. They wanted to rob this guy. And I was caught in the middle of it now, and it was done. There was no going back. But they assured me that he would not call the police. They said, he's not going to call the police. He's a drug dealer. Drug dealers don't call the police. What is he going to, he's going to say that we stole his drugs? No, he's not going to do that. So I said, okay, if he's not going to call the police, we're fine. I'm done with this. And we said goodbye. But he did call the police, and he told them what had happened. And he actually got sent to the hospital and was in critical condition, because the guys that one of the guys that I was with had hit him over the head with the gun, and he was bleeding profusely, and so they had to send him to the hospital. And he knew every single one of us and gave all our names. And so the next day, the cops came to every single one of our houses and beat the door down and came inside and arrested all of us and charged us all with the same crimes. I had to deal with what I had done, and the consequences were 5 felonies. They were throwing the book at us, and they wanted to put us away for the rest of our lives. And I basically thought my life was over at that point. Somehow, the judge let me out of jail, and my mom wanted, she put up a lot of money. She wanted me to say goodbye to my dad. My dad was dying. My dad didn't even look like my dad anymore. He was frail. Couldn't talk. At that very moment, that's when I told myself, and I told my dad, and I told my family as we stood around him, that I was done. And if I had another chance in life, I was going to turn it all around. And that's what I told my dad, and I promised him, and he died. And those were my last words. So a year later, I I did really well. I ended up convincing the judge that I had turned my life around, and I did. I started back up with school. I cut all old ties with all the bad people in my life. I started working, and I started fixing myself, recovering. I went through I went through treatment, and the judge took it easy on me. Gave me, for that he did. He gave me 10 years probation. I had to pay this kid like $20,000, and there were a bunch of other things, but for the most part, I got off very easy, and I got another chance to make things right and to keep my promise, and that's what I've done. So that was about 5 years ago, and I haven't touched a drug since. I would rather die. I would rather die than pick up a drug, and that's the truth. I know if I were to go back to that life, I would basically be killing myself. There's no way I would survive. I know I'm a drug addict, and I'll always be one, but I will do everything in my power never to go back to that lifestyle. My dad's gone, but whoever remains in my family, we're very close. And I wrote a book and started a website and doing speaking, and I'm just trying to give back and trying to make sure that I can keep as many people from making the same mistakes that I made. If I could do it all over again, I would have put being popular, and I would have put having a social life as very, very distant seconds to making good grades and taking care of my family and making sure I was doing the right thing and not getting mixed up in what I got mixed up in. And I lost a lot of years to drugs, but you have to bounce back from that. You have to learn from your mistake. I never learned from my mistake. I made a mistake and then I made it 10 times worse. I'm gonna wrap up, and thank you so much, guys. Great audience. I really wish you the best of luck.